x's be crazy, so if we go from the equation to words or to mapping, our x's switch, right? Horizontal stretch flips, reflection changes, all those things. Horizontal translations are opposite, right? When we talked about horizontal translations, though, I just want to show you guys something. So we had like y equals to x minus 4 squared plus 6. Say that was what you were given in 20-1, right? When we talked about this, we would have said a vertical stretch by a factor of 2 about the x-axis. We would have said a horizontal translation 4 units right, vertical translation 6 units up, correct? What was always in front of our x in 20-1 was a 1. Do you see that? There's a 1 in front of our x. So our horizontal translation always works when you have a positive 1 in front of your x. So we always have to make sure there's 2 things that happen before we state any type of transformation or before we do any mapping, okay? Our equation has to be in y equals, and there has to be a 1 in front of our x, a positive 1, okay? So looking at this example that's in our notes, I'm going to look at B here. So before I start anything, I have to make sure that it's in y equals, and I have a 1 in front of my x, correct? So this equation is in y equals, check, cool. Is there a 1 in front of my x? No. What is there? -2. So we have to GCF that out to get a positive 1. So we're going to get y equals bracket, and we're going to take a -2 out of those 2 terms. We agree? So we take a -2 out, and we're left with x minus 2 squared, because -2x divided by -2 is 1x. Do you see that? And then 4 divided by -2 is -2. So whenever you're taking out a GCF or a greatest common factor, the mathematical operation that you're doing is division, right? Now do we have a 1 in front of our x? Yes. The other thing I need you to note is that the -2 is still with the x. So a lot of people think at first when this is taught that the -2 is now no longer with the x. It still is. It's still in the brackets and it's still squared. So everything on that equation is affecting x right now. Do you see that? People think that when I take it out, it now affects y. Still affects x's. Okay? So we're going to go from equation to words. So we're going to go over that arrow, correct? And when we go over the arrow, we always do the opposite with our x's. The only thing that's not opposite is the negatives. So let's discuss this. So we're going to do the transformations first. So we have to do stretch, reflect, translate. Stretch, reflect, translate. SRT, right? If you went RST like the alphabet, you'd still be fine. The key thing that has to be last is the T, because it's adding and subtracting. Okay? So we have a horizontal stretch because it's still with the x. We have a horizontal stretch by a factor of, so I'm going from equation to words mapping, correct? When I cross over the arrow, it flips. Yes? So what does the 2 become? It's currently 2 over 1. What does it become? 1 over 2. It flips. Do you remember that from yesterday? So if we're going from equation to words, going over the arrow, this 2 is going to actually become 1 over 2. And I don't use the negative because the negative is a reflection, right? So we have a horizontal stretch by a factor of a half about the opposite axis. So it's about the y-axis. So if it affects the x's, it's about the y-axis. So that gets rid of the 2, this 2 right here. Then we have a negative sign. So that's a reflection in the y-axis. It's always in the opposite one. You see how both of these are with the y-axis? So anything that affects x's is with the y-axis, and anything that affects y's is with the x-axis. So horizontal stretch by a factor of a half about the y-axis, a reflection in the y-axis, and then what's this? This has a 1 in front of it now. What is the x minus 2? It's a horizontal translation. Two units what? Right. True? So, we also have to do mapping. So it depends on where you go for, whether you keep the numbers you have or you flip them. So if I'm going from equation to mapping, it's going to flip. We agree? But if I use the words I already wrote to mapping, I'm going to keep them. So it depends on where you're going from. So if I go from the equation, it's going to be negative 1/2. Correct? It's going from equation to mapping, it's going to flip. Negative 1/2 x plus 2 on the y. If I go from the words, I use what it is, right? So it's a half, reflection, negative, 2 right, add 2. Does that make sense? Ish? What's the catch with C on example 6? What's the catch with C? There's two things I have to do before I can even start. I have to have it in y equals. Do I? Yes. And then I have to have a positive 1 in front of my x. Do I? No. So I need to take that negative 1 out, which actually makes my horizontal translation go the opposite direction. So if you forget to take it out, you're going to say it's translated the wrong way. Okay? So for C, I take that negative out. I'm going to get y equals f, negative 1, and then negative x divided by negative 1 is positive x. 3 divided by negative 1 is negative 3. Do you see how it is still with the x? It is still with the x. Do we agree? Not with the y. It is still with the x. If you alternate brackets around it, make it still with the x. So is there any... There's no vertical things happening because there's nothing outside the x, correct? It's all horizontal. X's be crazy, so they're going to flip. Now, if we look at that bracket, is there a horizontal stretch at all? Is there a number in front? No. Is there a reflection? Is there a negative 1 in front? Yep. So there's a reflection. In the, it's with the x, so it's in the what? Y-axis. If I want to deal with my mapping, I'm going to have x, y becomes negative x, comma, some, right? I know my y is going to stay the same because nothing affects the y. And then what is this x minus 3? Horizontal translation, 3 units what? Right. You see, if you forget to take the negative 1 out, you're going to say left, and you're going to be wrong. Make sure you take that negative 1. So you get a horizontal translation. Three units, right. Then we're going to flip over. Okay, here's words. I want you guys to try and make the equation. Words, I want you to try and make the equation from y equals f of x. Okay, so 7 says determine the replacement for x or y, write the equation. So we have a horizontal stretch by a factor of 6. What always helps me out is equation, words, and mapping. I don't really need these anymore, but it would have helped me out when I was doing these, because I know you guys don't remember when they flip, when you keep. That's the biggest problem. Y's never flip. So if you're like, I wonder if I should flip them, don't. They never do not flip them. If you flip a y, you're wrong. Okay? So don't. All right. So horizontal stretch by factor of 6 about the x-axis. We're going from words to equation. We're going over the arrow, correct? So everything, all the x's will flip. We agree? So we get y equals f, and in with the x, what am I going to have? 6 or 1/6? 1/6. We're going from words to equation. Words to equation. It flips. If you don't know, if you're like 50-50 guessing, this unit will go terribly. There is no in between for this unit. You get like 20s and 30s or 90s and 100s. There is no in between. Why? Because you're either flipping when you shouldn't or you're doing everything right. If you flip when you shouldn't, the answer will be there. You're going to pick it and you'll be wrong. So we always need to know exactly what we do. Okay? Vertical. Do verticals ever flip? No. So it's 1/5, and it's going to be 1/5. Crazy, I know. So we're going to get y equals, not with the x, 1/5 f of x. Then we get a vertical stretch by a factor of 3 about the x-axis. It's vertical again, not switching. So we're going to get y equals 3f. And the reflection in the x-axis is the negative with the x or the negative with the y if it's in the x-axis? X or y? Y. Look, this one was in the x-axis, so is this. With the y. My x has nothing. Horizontal stretch by a factor of 1/2. So it's horizontal. It's going to flip. We're going from words to equation, correct? If we were going from words to mapping, I would use a half. Wouldn't flip. So we're going to get y equals, we have that f, then we're going to get 2, vertical stretch by a factor of 1/4, verticals never switch, 1/4, x. Do you see how if you don't know if you flip or you keep, how it's going to be really bad? Every multiple choice answer to you flipping or keeping the wrong way will be there. So it doesn't go well. You need to know exactly, this time I flip, this time I keep. Flip, keep, flip, keep. Okay? Okay, here it says, describe how the graph of the second function compares to the graph of the first function, and then do mapping. So we need words. Is this affecting x's or y's? X's, correct? X's be crazy. We're going from equation to words. Correct? So it's going to flip. So I have a half in my equation. What am I going to have in my words? A 2. So I'm going to have a horizontal stretch by a factor of 2 about the what? The y-axis. So we have x, y becomes what? Words and mapping in a heart. Samesies, right? What do I use in words? The number 2. What am I going to use in mapping? The number 2. Okay? So I'm going to get 2x, comma y. Yeah? Go. So this one, the 2 and the 2 are the same. This is an exponential function. You don't even know that. That doesn't matter that you don't know that. What matters is we discuss what's different between them. Okay? The only difference is this 3 beside the x, which is with the x, correct? If we have a 3 with the x, and it's in front of the x, it's a horizontal stretch by a factor of, we're going from equation to words, so we're going over the arrow. So it's a factor of what? 1/3. Always about the opposite. So it's about the y-axis. then words and mapping are the same. So we get x, y becomes, it's going to affect my x. It is the number a third, so it will be the number a third in mapping. Same numbers in words and mapping, right? So we'll get 1, don't even know what I was doing. 1/3 x, comma y. Then we look at C. C has the absolute value of x graph, and here's still the absolute value of x, so the only thing that's changed is that. Is that with the x inside the absolute value sign? Do the absolute value signs do anything? No, they just draw an absolute value graph. Don't think they're going to change the numbers in the middle of it. They're not. Don't overthink it. Same thing all the time. So, this is all vertical. It's not with the x. So it's a vertical, and do vertical things ever change? Ever flip? No. So it's a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. Not -2. The negative is not a vertical stretch. The negative doesn't stretch it at all. The negative reflects it. Factor 2 about the opposite axis. So it's about the what? X-axis. And then a reflection in the x-axis, which both affect y's. So I'm going to get x, y becomes x, comma, nothing affected my x, so my x will stay the same, right? And then -2 is what I need to multiply by. Y's are the best because y's never change. So if you have a -2, you'll have a -2. Dealt with for words, you'll have a -2 in everything. Never changes. Y's be awesome. This one is different than the last one in the fact that the -2 is with the x. So it affects x things. It doesn't make it positive because it's an absolute value sign. So we have a horizontal stretch. Stretches are always positive. Horizontal stretch by a factor of what? 1/2. Because we're going from equation to word, so it will flip, right? About the opposite axis. So it's horizontal, so it's about the y-axis, yeah. And my reflection, which is the negative sign, is in the opposite axis too. So it's a reflection in the, it's affecting the x's, so it's a reflection in the y-axis. And then words and mapping are the same. So I get x, y becomes negative. In words, I'm using 1/2. In mapping, I use 1/2. X, comma, y. E has a vertical stretch and a horizontal stretch plus. So we have the 2 in front. That is a vertical stretch. By a factor of 2, it never flips, about the opposite axis. So it's a vertical, it's about the x-axis. And then we have a horizontal stretch by a factor of what? 3. Because we're going from equation to words over that arrow, right? About the opposite axis. So if it's horizontal, it's about the y-axis. Stretches always multiply. The numbers I have are 2 and 3. So in mapping, I'm going to have 2 and 3. Because in words, I have 2 and 3. In mapping, I have 2 and 3. Right? So x, y becomes vertical, 2. So that's going to affect my y. 2y. Horizontal, 3. 3x. Words and mapping numbers are the same. Problem with f is it's not in y equals, correct? So when we divide by 3, people think it's with the x. It's not with the x. If it was with the x, it would be inside that bracket. It's not. Dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by a third. So you actually get 1/3 in front. X cubed. That doesn't affect the x's at all. Do I expect you to have done that one right? No. You did, yay. But I don't expect it. So the 1/3 is sitting in front, which affects y, which is vertical. Does vertical ever flip? So a third is going to be in words, and a third is going to be in mapping, right? And a third is going to be in equation. Never flips. So that's a vertical stretch because it's not with the x. So it's a vertical stretch. By a factor of 1/3, about the opposite axis. So it's about the what? Y. Yeah, yes. And then mapping, it affects y, so we get xy becomes x comma 1/3 y. And then we're flipping over. So it's just combining them like we did before. Here I want you to do describing and mapping. And then when we're done this, we're done. So y equals 4. F, what's the problem with C? What's in front of my x? A -2. So I have to take that -2 out, correct? So I'm going to get -2 x, so that's going to be 1x. -2x divided by -2 is 1x. 10 divided by -2 is -5. So I want you to do words and mapping for all three of these. I'll give you about 5-ish minutes, and then we're going to go through them, and then you'll be done. So this one has x's by itself, so nothing's happening to the x's, so the y's are staying the same all the way through. So for example, my mapping I could do right away. xy becomes x is staying the same. Then 1/2 y minus 2. Because they're not changing. So the half in front is a vertical stretch by a factor of 1/2. About the opposite axis, so about the x-axis. And then a vertical translation 2 units down. And then this one, my mapping would be x, y, becomes my x is the opposite, so the x plus 5, and then -3y. And then for words, it would be a vertical stretch. Stretches are never negative, by the way. So watch yourself when you put negatives, because that's a reflection. Vertical stretch by a factor of, vertical never changes, 3. Opposite axis, above the x-axis. Let's go stretch, reflect, translate. The negative in front is a reflection in the x-axis. And then this x minus 5 is a horizontal translation. Five units right. And then this one has a vertical stretch by a factor of 4. About the x-axis. And I have to do my horizontal stretch. It's going to flip, so the 2 is going to become a half. Horizontal stretch by a factor of a half. About the y-axis. The negative in front of the 2 is a reflection in the y-axis. and then a horizontal translation 5 units right. And the mapping, this xy becomes negative a half x plus 5, comma 4y.